All right, everybody, come on in, grab a virtual seat. Welcome. Just wait a moment. All right, well, let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another presentation of the online ColdFusion Meetup. I'm Charlie Arehart, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. And in this edition of the Meetup, our 299th, getting to the big 300. This session today will being recorded on Thursday, September 29th, 2022 at noon US Eastern is going to be a talk I'll be giving you on using Adobe's new CFSetup tool to manage the CF administrative settings for any CF version. So if you saw the description of the presentation, I'll get a little bit more into what the talk will be about in just a moment. Before I do, let me just remind you that the session is being recorded. The YouTube meeting URL you're looking at right now will be the same URL people would watch when they watch the recording. And it'll be posted, as always, on recordings.coldfusionmeetup.com. And if any of you maybe go look at that, you'll see that Meetup has just announced that the pages feature, where I've been keeping that for 15 years, they're getting rid of that feature. So I'll find a new place for it. But thankfully, I've got this domain name that I'll redirect it to wherever I decide to put it, maybe GitHub pages. So anyway, lastly, I want to say, if any of you have any interest at all in presenting, we welcome anybody giving a talk on anything related to CF. And you can learn more in a FAQ I put together at speak.coldfusionmeetup.com. And to that point, next week is the Adobe ColdFusion Summit 2022. And sadly, they're not recording those for various technical and union reasons. So they're not recording them. And therefore, I would welcome any of the presenters of the dozens of talks being given at CF Summit, come and give them here on the ColdFusion Meetup. We'd welcome you. It's just a matter of we pick a date sometime between now and the end of the year. Whenever works well for you, I'd welcome you. Glad to have you. And again, anybody else, even if you've got a talk that you've never given before, or you just have an idea that you want to consider, feel free to consider that. We'd welcome you. All right, with that, let me go ahead and switch over and we'll proceed with my talk. All right. So again, it'll be on using Adobe's new CFSetup tool. And some of you maybe didn't even know there was such a thing, perhaps until you saw my notice about this talk, or perhaps you still haven't even looked into it. So just as a reminder, you can reach out to me for feedback about the presentation at my email address there, charlie@carehart.org, or via any of the social media at just Carehart. So anything, LinkedIn, Slack, Twitter, GitHub, Facebook, they're all the same. So feel free to share feedback. I look forward to hearing from anybody about this stuff and about anything I can help with. Just let me know. So who's this talk for? Well, I'm speaking primarily to people who have some need to view or manage the CF administrator settings in some CF version. And I want to repeat, in any version. So this tool, CFSetup, is new with CF 2021, but it is not limited to just CF 2021. That's very important that you hear, because you don't hear many people talk about this tool. It's been quiet, and it would be easy for everybody to be presuming that it only works with CF 2021. I'm going to show you that's not the case at all. So that really increases its value. And maybe you need to migrate settings between one version and another, or compare settings between one version and another, and all that's possible with this tool. And of course, between different versions. So if you wanted to compare the CF settings you have in a newly minted CF 2021 to what you had in some prior CF 2018, 2016, 11, or 10, yeah, you could use this tool. And I'll even show doing that in this talk. And then some of you will get this more for the value to automate things. Yeah, so you can automate the import of settings. And we'll talk about how you can do that with Docker images from Adobe, or you can just do it through command line scripting. We'll see how that's all easily done. And there's my point. You might want to, somebody might say, hey, we require, infrastructure as code, configuration as code. Everything's got to be done by code. No touching a GUI. Okay, you don't have to touch the GUI. You can do everything by code. You can do everything through this scripting. Yeah, so that's another great benefit of this tool. Now, I want to clarify that the talk is not about the settings in the administrator or using the administrator. That could be its own talk. And Mark Takata has actually done a couple talks where he's gone over some of the key settings. And as he found out, when you do that, heck, you could get a whole hour on one of the pages. And so there's only a few that are key. But anyway, the point is that's not the focus of this talk at all. And it's also not an overview of every new feature of this new tool. And I say new in quotes because, you know, it came out in November of 2020. So it's now approaching 2 years old. But for many, many people, it's new to them. And again, my point is I'm not going to talk about everything about it because we could go beyond an hour. So I'm going to try to keep all this within an hour. But I really do think that virtually everybody watching will get some benefit out of it wherever they are. And I don't remember if I say this here. Well, let me just say this. Well, I'll get to it in a moment. I'll hold that thought I was about to say for just a moment. Because I think there's an issue that some people are scratching to ask about or talk about. And I'll get to that in just a second. Kind of an elephant in the room to some people. But I want to say that this talk and these slides that you're looking at are already on my website at carehart.org/presentations. Let me just go there real quick and show you. If you go to carehart.org/presentations, or if you just go to my site and click on this presentations button, there's all my presentations. I've done 160 different talks in the past 20 plus years, and they're all there. The PDFs are always there. The recordings are often there, and you can, see the description. And I didn't change the link. I'm sorry. I don't want to do that right now. As soon as we're done, I will do that. I put the file up there, but I forgot to change this. I really could have sworn I did that. It must be sitting in an editor somewhere on one of my computers. Anyway, apologies for that. So you can't get it right now, but just here's my point is don't worry about writing down the links or any points that you see on these slides. You'll get the slides. Everything you see, you'll get. Now I'll do some demos where those won't be on the slides, but again, you'll have the recording to watch this stuff later. All right. So what are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about getting started with it and some background of it to help you give context. Why does the tool exist? How does it, compare to other options you might be thinking of? And then I'll jump into demos. And the demos, I'll cover the fundamentals of using it because there's a couple key things you need to understand. The first time you see it, you might be a little thrown off just getting used to how it works. It's true with a lot of command line tools, right? Command line tools don't have a user interface. You got to learn how the tool works. I'll show you the fundamentals of how this tool works. Then I'll show using it with different CF instances. So yeah, you can definitely use it with other than just CF 2021. And I'll show viewing and managing how you can use it to view and manage all or even any individual CF admin settings with this tool. I'll show also exporting settings out of an instance into a JSON file. That is a feature of this tool. Yes, it can export any or all CF admin settings for an instance into a JSON file. And then we'll talk about automating the configuration of a CF administrator using this JSON file, whether you're using Docker or if you're not. So again, I know some of you are and some of you don't at all. So don't worry. This has got nothing to do with you using Docker. It's just a bonus that if you do use Docker or containers deployed on Kubernetes, doesn't matter. We're not talking about Docker specifically, just containers in general. You can use this CFSetup with that. And then I'll wrap up by showing you something that can make working with it easier for you. There's an aliases feature, and that aliases feature makes it easier to refer to instances when you might have more than one that you're working with. And I'm also going to show as a bonus how we would compare admin settings between instances. And it's really very easy to do. And once you see it, you go, oh, that's great. Now, I've hinted at this a couple times. Some of you might know about Adobe's ColdFusion car feature. We'll talk briefly about that. And some of you may know about Commandbox's CFConfig feature. And at the end, I'll talk about both of those and share some contrast between this and those and where each has its advantages. And some of you, I was thinking all along, have been wondering, hey, what about CFConfig? So just to be clear, quickly, a little preview is that Commandbox has a CFConfig module that does the same sort of stuff and has done it for a couple of years and does it with not only ColdFusion, but also Lucy. So people that are Commandbox users would be going, well, why would I use this? Well, the contrast is that there are people who don't use Commandbox or don't even know about Commandbox or know about Commandbox, but don't know about CFConfig. So Adobe created this CFSetup tool, again, for release in late 2020. Who knows how long they were working on it. You'll see it's pretty evolved. So it's not like they just started on it the day before. So anyway, I don't doubt that they probably got ideas from CFConfig or just they both had the same idea, but I'm pretty sure that CFConfig existed for a couple years before that. So, I don't want to get into that. I have nothing to do with this. I didn't help Adobe do it. I don't make Adobe do it. I wasn't using either one in particular beforehand. So I'm just saying, I'm just an information provider. And you hear lots of people talk about CFConfig because it's great. If you use Commandbox, it's a given you'd want to use it. But again, there's plenty of people who either don't hear about it because of their nature of their work, or they wouldn't use it for whatever reason. And the fact that Adobe provides a tool inside of CF now and available to download to use with any CF version, that's a feather in Adobe's cap for people that want to leverage it. So that's the point of this talk, is that you hear virtually nobody talk about CFSetup. And I thought, hey, it's worth talking about. It's got a lot of capability. You can see all these things we're going to discuss. So let's go ahead and jump in. Just quickly about myself, as some of you know, but some don't, I'm an independent consultant. I just help folks troubleshoot CF issues all day. It's all I do all day. Installation, configuration, administration, migration, updating, upgrading, containerizing, anything, troubleshooting, tuning, whatever you have trouble with, reach out to me. I can help. And I'm also a longtime contributor to the community in a lot of ways. My website's got a lot of resources on it besides the presentation, so I'll leave you to look into that on your own. And I do help people on whatever platform they're on, whether it's CF or Lucy, whether they're using Commandbox or not. I'm just here to help. I just want to help. That's my tagline most of the time when I'm writing an email. So I do also want to say a couple preliminary topics before we move on to the demos, that background stuff I was talking about. So as I said, the tool did come with CF 2021, and it is already installed if you have CF 2021. And it's just a script, a bat on Windows or a .sh file on Linux or Mac. And it's in the config CFSetup folder. So that can be a little confusing because people might be looking for it and going, I don't see it in the CFusion bin. If you're used to seeing scripts and executables in the CFusion bin, it's not there. And the reason it's not there is that CFusion bin would be unique to that particular instance. And if you don't use, anything but ColdFusion Standard, you may not know what I'm talking about. But if you use the Developer Edition or the Trial or the Enterprise Edition, you can create multiple instances. And each instance would be a sibling of that CFusion folder. So if they put it in the CFusion bin, then they'd have to also put it in each instance's bin. And it's designed to be kind of above that fray. And so it's implemented by default in this config CFSetup folder. That's all you need to know. And here's the cool thing is you can download the tool. This tool called CFSetup can be downloaded from Adobe. And I'll show you that in a bit. But the point is you don't even have to have CF 2021. You can get it from Adobe. And it's just a folder with some SH files and BAT files and Java jars and a couple of other things. And that's it. It's really pretty small and easy to use. Now, the next thing to understand about the tool is that it can be run either as an interactive CLI where you type CFSetup and hit enter, and now you're in the CLI. I'll just quickly go over and show you that. So I'm in the folder, config CFSetup. You can see it on the screen. And let me just make this a little bit bigger. I'm sure for some people, seeing I don't know, Control Plus works. Let me try it. Yeah, no, Control Plus doesn't raise it in Windows. Bigger for you. So that makes it a little too big this way. But can anybody type in the chat if you feel like you can't see that? I think it's pretty big when it's represented on your monitor. If you're looking on a phone, I realize it's going to be too small to see on a phone. We have to find a balance. So anyway, and by the way, I see a comment there from Drew asking if I'm dry. Yes. So I'm in South Central Kentucky, and we probably won't even see rain from the event. So sorry to hear about all the difficulty for people down in Florida. My sister's down in Tampa, so I'm still waiting to hear word on that. But I hope all's well for everybody down there. So back to this. So in the CFSetup folder is where this tool is. If I do Adobe CFSetup, there's the CFSetup bat, there's the CFSetup jar, and if you're on Linux, there would be an SH, or on Mac, Unix, there'd be an SH. And so I just am saying you can do CFSetup and some commands, as I'll show you, like show this or export that. And I'll talk about doing that in a moment. But you can also just hit enter, and now you go into the CLI. And they happen to show you as like help at the top. Here's all the commands. There's the export. and above that was a show. And we're not going to go over this now. I'm just saying you can see I'm in a command prompt now where I could do these commands like show this or export that or get help on a thing. So anyway, let's move on. I'm not really here to talk about that right now. I'm just saying it can be run interactively, or I'll say imperatively. Some people would have different ways of describing that, but CFSetup, do something. That's why it's called imperative. And here's the kicker. You can point it to any CF instance running any CF version. It does not necessarily have to be the one in which that folder was. And remember, the folder was in the config CFSetup. It's not technically in the CFusion. Now it is in the CF 2021 folder, but my point is it doesn't even presume to work with that necessarily. So you can point it to any CF version you want. I'll show you demos of that in a moment. And I've tested all the way back to CF9. Actually, I should back up. I should have said CF10. There was a quirk with CF9 where it didn't work. So I should say CF10. My apologies. Let me correct that, because I always like to get these correct if I'm going to post it on the web somewhere. On my site, I mean, I want it to be accurate. So I'll update that and post it and get that link corrected for you guys. Okay, so, and it does not work with Lucy, to be clear. It's Adobe's written, so they're not writing it to work with Lucy. And it would work fine with a ColdFusion that's deployed within Commandbox. You would just point to where within Commandbox the equivalent of the ColdFusion instance would be, where the equivalent of the CFusion folder would be with the lib and the bin, for those that know what I'm talking about. So I'll leave you to pursue that. But of course, if you're using Commandbox, you could just use CFconfig. But if you wanted to, I'm saying you could even explore using CFSetup with ColdFusion as deployed in Commandbox. Yes, you could. And so, yes, you could download it and use it on a machine that was running CF 2018 or less. So if you don't have 2021, you're not like you got to install 20. No, you just get the tool and download it and use it on whatever machine you have that runs CF. Or, of course, if you have it on one machine, but through mappings or shares, you can point to something on another machine. Sure, you can point the CFSetup tool to whatever file system folder represents a CF instance. And that instance does not need to be running. So this tool is not talking to the CF instance. It's literally just looking at the setup, the config files. It's, for those who know, it's the Neo XML files. That's in the CFusion lib folder. Again, we don't need to know or care about that stuff. If you use this tool, you just use CFSetup, and it can, again, look at, change, export, import settings into wherever they get implemented. That's an implementation detail. You don't need to worry about it. So the point is, no, the CF instance doesn't need to be running. So this could be a great thing if you're sitting on a new machine where you've installed a new CF version and you go, crap, I wanted to look at the CF admin setting for scheduled tasks on the old machine, but we stopped CF on the old machine and I don't want to start it just to be able to look at the admin. Crap, what am I going to do? Well, you can just either put CFSetup on that machine, or from this machine, if you could point to that machine, you could look with CFSetup at what the scheduled tasks were on that old instance. So it's really pretty cool stuff. And this is true whether you're viewing or exporting or importing things. Yeah, you can import things into an instance that is not running. It does not need to be running. The import will just pull the settings from the JSON file into the appropriate place in the config files of CF. And again, you don't need to worry about that anymore. And no, you should not be copying your Neo XML files between machines. You should definitely not do it between versions of CF. That is a big no-no. I know people do it and maybe say it's worked fine, but I can tell you, I do this for a living. I've had a lot of people whose trouble started when somebody copied the Neo XML files from one instance version to another instance version. So this tool should definitely help a lot. And I'll just add that if you do change or import some setting into an instance, then just like with the CF admin, some setting changes do require that you restart CF for that setting to take effect. This doesn't change that. So again, it just pulls the settings in on the import or in the change and makes them. And some of them, like in the admin, are immediately available. And some of them, you got to restart CF before they take effect. So just be aware. Again, these are fundamentals I want you to know before we get started. So let's jump in. Demo time. I know it's been a while. 20 minutes we're in. Let's see the actual demos. So actually, I forgot that I was going to show you that, but there you go, running the tool interactively or imperatively. I'll just do most of it imperatively, and you can go into the interactive if you want to. So yeah, there's the help. So let me just show again. We could say CFSetup help, and that shows all the commands that are available. You can look at that later. I can say help some command. So I could say CFSetup help, export, to see what are the options for doing an export, help show to see what are the options for showing particular settings, and we'll see demonstrations of that in a moment. And then there's even help for a category, because there's categories of settings, and I'll show you getting those categories in a moment. But like help data source at the category, and within that category, there's a lot of settings. So there's online help that shows you what are the available settings for that category and what are their data types and such. So that's cool. And there's even more, but again, we're not going to talk about everything. So as far as seeing what the categories are, in case you go, I'd like to manipulate the scheduled tasks, or I'd like to manipulate or see or view the mappings. What is the name of the category for doing that? We just say show category. And there they are, so scheduled task would just be scheduled task. Mappings would just be mapping. And just quickly as a side, CFConfig's got a similar concept to some of these things, and it has actually commands like CF mappings, they call it, instead of mappings, as a subcommand to the CFConfig. So anyway, you can look into that later. I'm just letting you know that there's corollaries between these things. They're not identical, so just be aware of that. But that's how you see what categories are available in this tool. All right, so that's that. Already did it. Now let's talk about using different instances. And I'll show actually looking at settings in a moment, but first I want to talk about how would we work with different instances. So the things I'm going to show from this point forward do require that you name an instance. Those things before, they were just generic. It didn't matter what instance you're in. The rest of the stuff, we got to say what instance to look at the settings or export the settings or import the settings. Well, notice we can point to the instance by a full or relative path. So if you happen to have CF installed on your C drive, that's the instance for the CFusion default instance. And of course, if you have, a instance called Bob, then you'd say ColdFusion 2021 Bob or ColdFusion 2018 Bob, or wherever you choose to put the instance, because you could put instances in different places and different OSs have things in different places. Again, just saying, what in Windows, that would be the place. And I want you to note that if you just get in the habit of doing things with Linuxy style paths, yeah, that'll work too. You could say C:/ColdFusion 2021 CFusion. And if I'm on the C drive, that would work. That's my point. If I'm sitting on the C drive, my ColdFusion's on the C drive, and I tell CFSetup to point to /ColdFusion 2021, it doesn't even care that the case isn't the same. On Windows, it doesn't care. Of course, on Linux, it would care. All right. And then also, if I'm running it in the config CFSetup folder like I was, well, I could even use a relative path pointing up, because CFSetup is in config. So I go up one level, and then config has a sibling of CFusion. So I go up to the top and then down into that sibling of CFusion. So that would work. I'm just saying that would work. And like I said, it can be done with any CF instance, even back to CF10. And I want to remind you, I said earlier that rather than do this thing of pointing to an instance by the path, you can also use a notion of an alias. I'll save that for later because it's not important right now to see it, but it is a useful feature. And you might go, I appreciate that now once you've seen it. So what about this notion of getting it before we even try to use it? What if you don't have it, right? I just want to put, you guys might be sitting on a computer, laptop, machine, workstation, whatever, VM, where you don't currently have CF 2021. Well, if you do, it's already there. But if you don't, you got to go get it. And you get it from Adobe's ColdFusion downloads page. For some of you who know that, it's this weird looking URL. But if you just Google ColdFusion downloads, or whatever search engine you like to use, pretty much all of them, you say ColdFusion downloads, the first thing that comes up is that page. And that page, if you've been there before, it's got all kinds of stuff on it. And it's in the docs, by the way, now. So this is all doc stuff. It has nothing to do with other than this page is within that section of these docs. But this, just look at the page. There's the ColdFusion 2021 related things of various types. There's ColdFusion 2018 things of various types, even some 2016 things of various types. And for our interest, it's this CF 2021 CFSetup configuration tool. So that just drops us down to the place on the page where it talks about that thing, and then there it is, and it's just a zip. And if I were to get it, you'll see it's pretty tiny, 14 meg, so nothing to it. And I'll just go ahead and open it so you can see what it looks like. And it looks like my antivirus is currently scanning it and making sure that it's okay. And then once it's okay, I'll be able to open it. I also had another one there. I could just go to that folder. Let me see if I can find another one there. It's probably already there by the time I do all that. Or go to show in folder, sort it by name. And there's the other one that I downloaded. And I already compared this one. The newest one is the same as this one. So here's what's in that zip. And I'll just say again, there's the bat, there's the SH, there's the Java jar that goes with it. And then they have some other stuff in there related to it. Again, we're not going to focus on that in this talk. But that's how you do. You just get it, and you would extract that zip and put it wherever you want it, and then you would run it. Now, I will say, and the docs cover this, you would need to have Java installed if you don't currently have Java installed, or if you have not set up so that Java is available from the command line, you'll have to do some stuff about setting the Java home. But again, that's not unique to this tool. That's true with any Java-based tool. This tool is a Java-based tool. Anyway, the docs cover that. Don't let that worry you at all. And they call this standalone mode. It's not really a mode. It's just you can get it and install it, and then you can run it. So anyway, just beware. And there's the specific link. So when you get this presentation later, that URL that I'm showing you goes to that specific section of that page. That # is an anchor that points to it. And again, they call it standalone mode, but it's just the download of the CFSetup tool. All righty, so let's move on to more demos. So what if we want to just look at all the settings that are available, or all the settings in a particular category for some particular CF instance? So I'm going to go back here. I'll clear the screen. And let's just say CFSetup show all in my C, or it's D in my case, D, ColdFusion, not ColdFusion, that was John Mason, ColdFusion 2021 C Fusion. Now, again, I have to say C Fusion because, again, technically one can have more than one instance. Most people don't if they're just using standard, or if they never bother to create an instance, they just have one. But that is the root of a given CF instance by default, C Fusion. And notice I didn't worry about the case, and there you go. It just flies by. These are all the settings in that CF admin. And I'll just say in passing right now, you can see a password here. It's encrypted. We'll talk about passwords later. Just like they're shown as encrypted, if you were to look at the underlying XML files, they're also shown here as encrypted. And that's a good thing. But somebody might say, oh, I'd like to see the password. Could it decrypt it? Well, this tool doesn't do that. We'll talk in a bit about how CFconfig does that, for better or worse. So, all right, moving on. That was, there you go, show all, right? That's all the settings. And it's about 300 of them, if you didn't know, which is pretty compelling. All of them are available to view. I could, of course, search for something. And for those who don't, if you're working at Windows especially, and this would be true also in Linux, but in Windows, I can just do a Control F and find whatever I want. So like if I wanted to find a scheduled task of some sort, I just say Control F, type scheduled. By default, when you're at the command line, it goes up. I didn't choose that. It just goes up. And so if I have any scheduled task, it would find it. I don't happen to have any. Let me look at a data source. I have some data source stuff in there. And of course, I have things that say data source. And I'm not saying this is the way I would do it. I just wanted you to know you could search for something. If you're looking for some particular thing, you could do that from right here. You don't have to write it to a file or anything like that. Just search it. But let's say I do want to find just my data sources. Well, that's a category. Remember, we said show category. So, and I can never remember whether it's plural or singular. I think in this tool, it's singular. And there you go. There's my data sources. And if I had said data sources, it would have said, I don't know what you're talking about there, Bob. So that's the way the tool works if you do something that fails. And I'm pretty sure I can say, show me a particular one. Like I have a data source there called test, show data source test. And now I'm seeing just the settings for that particular data source. Now, again, some of you might be going, oh, this is cool, but I'm not going to be doing this. I'm just showing what it can do. If you don't want to do this sort of thing, okay, cool. You don't need to do it. But some people are going, oh my goodness, that's great. And you guys watching aren't saying much of anything, but I'm assuming that some people watching the recording will to themselves be saying, oh, that will be, somebody will go, oh, that's helpful. I can do that. Now let's move on and talk about, if I go back to showing data sources, what if I want to see my data sources in 2018? I happen to have ColdFusion 2018 installed on the same machine in the same D drive, and it's just ColdFusion 2018. And I'm just going to change it to do that. And it's plural. Sorry, it's not plural. So there you go. And now I'm going to see whatever data sources I had defined in my CF 2018. And that's getting pretty cool when you start to think about that. Like if you're sitting on 2021 thinking, oh man, what were my data sources in 2018? Well, if you can point to the folder where ColdFusion 2018 was, you don't need to go to the admin in 2018. You don't need to go to the machine if you've got a share or a NAS or SAN or something where you can point to where it's installed or whatever, a mapping, whatever. I'm just saying, you just point to the folder. Again, ColdFusion 2018, and I'm going to keep going. I have 2016 installed. Yes, I do. And yes, you can. And you can even now run it at once if you wanted to, if you have enough memory on the machine. And so anyway, there's, they're different. If you notice those lists each time, they're different. And heck, I can keep going. I've got 11 as well. And we can play this game all day. I'm just telling you, it's all supported. Now, if I go all the way back to 9, I believe I have 9 on this machine. So no, I must not have 9 on this machine, but I can just tell you I've done that on a machine where I had 9 and it didn't work. It tried to, but something about it is not right. And I think what it is that there's a file in that CFSetup folder, which is some JSON of the settings, and they don't even show that they support 11 and 10, but what they've got for 2016 works with 11 and 10. It just doesn't work for 9. That was a big change between 9 and earlier and 10 and later. So let's just say for now, I doubt Adobe will ever do anything to fix it. You can't use it with 9 or earlier, but you can definitely use it with 10 and later. Okay, hope that helps. Now, what about getting an individual setting? And by the way, I showed you looking at a particular data source, and like I could say, CF Club. I'm not talking about that. Yes, you can. Oh, sorry, 2011 it was. So in 11, I had this thing called the book club, and I can look at the settings for that. What I'm saying is, what if you just want to see some particular setting? Like some of you know that ColdFusion has a request timeout setting. What if you just wanted to look at the request timeout setting for that particular instance? Well, if you knew that was the name of the setting, you could just say request timeout. I'm pretty sure that is a supported one. I must have something not quite right there. Did I show an example? No, I didn't put it there. Well, anyway, if I do, I'll just punt. And I just want to show you, this is real world. This could happen to you. You're saying, oh, I want to look at that one particular setting. What was it called? I would just do a show all. And now they're all there. And I'll just do a find for request. The slow request limit, request. So it's still just not spelled as that. But anyway, I could also just look for timeout. Go down. And there's various timeouts. And I'm just not remembering what the name of this one was. And the point is, once you know it and would want to use this to get it, then the point is you can just do it from the command line. You don't need to do any of this stuff. And I'm sorry, I should have written that down. It's going to be in here somewhere. But, for example, let's just use, like session storage. Well, that's new in 2018. That may not. Maybe somebody says, what's the, size of the max post data? So this was a change in CF8 that they added for security reasons, where they defaulted to only letting you post up to 20 meg of post parameters, or sorry, is it 20 items. So if you had a form that had more than 20 fields on it and you try to post that, it would fail, as some of you know if you've gone through this. Well, that's in the admin on the requests page as the maximum size of post data, they call it there, and that's the name of the setting. So my point is I can say, all right, well, I want to look at the value of that thing, size of post data for my CF11. What am I not doing? Max size and post it. Oh, I'm sorry. I've been saying show. That's my bad. Nobody jumped in to tell me. It's get. So show is to see things, several things. Get is to look at one thing. My bad. And we could argue they should have allowed that, but they didn't. So anyway, and I think there's a corollary of that in Commandbox as well. So what's going on? What am I missing? Access about setting category. Well, I'm not asking for a category. I'm asking for. I think it's that I need to know if it's inside of a category. I need to name that category, then name that thing. So let's just quickly. I apologize. I should have had a demo ready to go, but this is real world. You would go through this yourself. So whatever that was called. Okay, so there it is, and I'm just going to scroll up and see. Well, what's that inside of? Runtime settings. So it's in runtime settings. It's in a category called runtime settings. And there could be, here's the point before we go griping that Adobe has, made a mistake here. There could be similar sounding, setting names that are in different categories. So they're just saying, you got to tell me what category it's in. Now I see Jeff said, don't you have to name the DB? Yeah, you're misunderstanding. I appreciate you're trying to help there. The max size of post data has nothing to do with the DB. So you're right. If I was, just to continue my thought, if I was looking at a setting within a data source, then I would need to tell it the name of the data source and the setting. But I'm just trying to look at a setting that's not about a data source. And it's about runtime. Well, I just want to remind you, I showed you earlier, we can say CFSetup show category. And some of you, could be at this point checking out and thinking, that's too much difficulty. Well, it's a command line tool. You got to learn how to use command line tools. And if you learn what I'm telling you here, you'll make your life easier. And so sure enough, runtime is a category. Runtime's a category. That setting was in that category. So all I got to do here is say runtime. And there it is. All right. So if you're following, I said now CFSetup get runtime is the category. Max size post data is the setting. And if I wanted to change this now to look at, well, what did I do on CF10? I just change that. And now I'm looking at CF10. Or if I say I want to see a CF 2018. So I'm just telling you, you just got to get in your brain. That's how easy it is to do this stuff. And that could be useful for you. Again, some of this is a little too low level detail. You're not going to ever do it. I get it. You might never, ever use the get command. Well, let it go. We spent 5 minutes on it. Let it go. Everything else hopefully will be valuable. And you can set individual settings. And in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. But just to say, yes, you could set such a setting. You just set the thing equal to some value. In fact, let's just do it just so nobody could go, hey, you didn't show that. Set that equal to 22. All right. And now if I do the get, it's 22. The big point is, if I looked in that CF admin for that CF 2018 that I just did this in, the admin would now say, yeah, it's 22. I've changed it immediately from the command line. And now that, to some people, will start to get you a little more excited at the prospect, especially of being able to do this sort of configuration from the command line. But the real power is in the JSON files where you could do lots of stuff. These onesie-twosie things, that might rock somebody's boat, but the JSON file is going to be the really compelling thing. And you can even add new things that aren't there. So if you wanted to add a data source, there's an add command where you could add a data source. Or if you wanted to add a mapping, there's an add to add a mapping. In the interest of time, I'm not going to demonstrate that. It's documented. And let me just repeat, that docs, which I hadn't yet shown you guys, I've got links to it. Here's the docs page. The URL's in the PDF that you'll get after the session. Again, that's a mistake. I meant for you to be able to get it before the session or at the session. But anyway, in here, it's got examples. So if I say CFSetup add, well, they may not show it with the word add in front of it. I'll say add data source. There you go. So like there's an example. It happens to be a NoSQL one it came upon. But look how easily you can say add data source, name equals whatever, driver equals whatever, port equals whatever. Well, and that's helping us to see that there's the help, and it's helpful to see that. CF So if you wanted to manually add a data source from the command line, yeah, the point is you can do that. You don't have to go to the admin. You don't have to go tweaking the Neo XML file. And if it's one of the built-in ColdFusion drivers, you just say the name of the driver. So you guys know that there's, the SQL Server one, and there's the Derby one, and there's the Oracle one. And the MySQL one is there, but you got to add the MySQL char for it to work. That has nothing to do with this. But yeah, so look at all the things you could do to add other settings related to it. And these are other categories, sorry, that are related to it. So, and it says changes made via CFSetup will be applied after restarting ColdFusion. Let me think about that. I suppose that some of them, now that I think about it, would not even be loaded. My bad. They would not necessarily be loaded and showing up in the admin. Just because you change the XML, some things appear, some things don't, and some things appear, but they haven't really taken effect. So they're warning you that you should restart CF. I guess I should change my discussion back there to just say, yeah, just be aware when you make these changes. By and large, you probably need to restart CF for them to take effect. And I'm sure there are some where this doesn't apply, and then there's some where it does. And that was my point earlier. But again, let's not worry about that for now, because this is just one facet of using the tool. The other parts are just as compelling and valuable. I just wanted to say, as I did a moment ago, there are many examples in that doc page. That link there is that doc page. And I take, for some reason, I take you to this particular, I don't know if managed ColdFusion settings made sense to put there. But anyway, that page is a big honking page with lots of stuff. We'll talk more about that later on. All right, moving on to demos. Let me see how we're doing on time. We got 20 minutes. So exporting and importing all or some of the settings. This may be the thing that rocks people's boats more than anything, is there's an export and an import command, and that can export to a JSON file, any settings or all settings, and import into an instance, any or all settings. Even within a JSON file that has all the settings, you could say, I only want to import some of the settings. Yes, it's got that flexibility. So it'd be done by name in the category. So if I said I wanted to import the scheduled tasks from a thing that had everything else, I could just say, just import the scheduled tasks. And you can even specify more than one category at a time. So I could say import scheduled task, comma, data sources. And I would be bringing in the scheduled tasks and the data sources at once. That's cool. The show command doesn't offer that. It's show one category. I demonstrated that myself. So, and it's really nothing to it. I mean, I'll just quickly do a demonstration just in case anybody says, hey, you didn't show that. So we'll export my CF 2018 settings since it's there. And I'll just say export CF 2018.json. So I'm saying to export everything to that from that instance. Say export all. Yeah. So I could have said export data sources and just gotten the data sources. There you go. You can see it's telling me the categories that it's exporting. So if I wanted to, I could have said just export data sources to like CF 2018 DSNs. And now I've got two files in there, data source singular. At least it won't ever make you dizzy, like some of you will know I'm talking about. So, or won't complain that it's dizzy. So anyway, moving on. So there they are. Now I was about to talk about passwords in a moment, but let me just take a moment to look at that folder where we just put those. I mean, actually, I can do it from here. If you guys don't know that, you can say Notepad and then point to the file. There's my Notepad of CF 2018 JSON. It put it in this directory because I didn't tell it to put it somewhere else. So it's put it right here, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there you go. And that's the XML file. Let me maximize it so it looks more clear. So that's just a big honking JSON with all those categories and all those settings in those categories. And, you know, if you want to go in there and work with it, play with it, edit it, you can, but you don't need to. The point is, once you've exported it, then you could import it into something else. And just quickly, I'll show you that one called DSNs, and we'll see it's just the DSNs. Now, you can see already something here a little bit different here about a seed. That wasn't in the other one. We'll talk about that stuff in a bit. Let's hold off. There you go. So if you were to do that command, oh, sorry, I see a question. This export works for, yeah, everything, every setting. So, you know, I did data sources. I could have done scheduled tasks. I could have done mail. I'm pretty sure mail is just mail. So I'll just say mail. That's just a guess. Yep, there's a category called mail. There's my mail settings. I inadvertently put it in the DSNs, but anyway, I'll just edit it quickly just to show you. Yep, there's mail related stuff, the mail server and things like that. And the passwords are encrypted. So again, hold that thought. We'll come back to that in a moment. So, and I just realized that I just experienced something that's a little different than what I'd experienced before. When you export settings that include a password, sorry, my bad. If you were to do it in the terminal mode, if I were in CFSetup doing things, when I created that export, if it included a password, it would have prompted me, give me a passphrase to use. I'd like to look at that. Sorry, I'm a little distracted by that, what just happened, because I'm trying to think how to explain this in the right context. But let me just finish what I'm saying here. If you're in the terminal mode where you're, let's say, CFSetup, and you did that export, if you exported something that had a password, it would prompt you for a passphrase. You would name that phrase, and then it would build into that JSON a seed for decrypting it. I'm going to talk about that later. I felt like this would be a little bit too disruptive to get into that detail now. So just hold that thought. And if I don't get to it, I've got a slide where you can read about it later. Then I wanted to add, though, that if you're in that imperative mode like I was, if you want to define a passphrase, then you would just add -p equals passphrase as either the first or the last argument of the export. And then similarly on the import. Okay, so if you do an import at the command line in the terminal, interface, the interactive CLI, when you did an import, it would say, hey, what's the password? When you did it from the imperative mode, if it had a passphrase, you'd have to tell it using that -p. Okay, I'll talk about this stuff later. I knew that could be a little bit of a sidetrack, but I want to get some other important stuff. So automating the administration of CF configuration by JSON. I want you to know that if you use Adobe's ColdFusion Docker images, which have existed for CF 2016, 2018, and 2021, they only support and update now the ones for 2018 and 2021. But in particular, the images for 2021, they modified them to support importing that JSON by just naming the JSON file. There's an environment variable. For those that do Docker stuff, you know what I'm talking about. There's an environment variable called import CF settings. And you name the file that you want to import. And you would put that file into the images app folder, either in a Docker file. You could copy it in there, or you can do a volume that points to it. And that's not the right presentation to talk about that detail. But the point is, if in that container and in the image at its startup, if the app folder has such a JSON file, this tool will import it. I'm pretty sure it deletes it too after it's imported it. I meant to demonstrate that for myself to remind me. I didn't get it to do that. Anyway, as far as that passphrase, I should have said passphrase, not passkey. That passphrase, if one has been set, then you would name it with another environment variable called import CF settings passphrase. And we're running short on time, so I'm not going to demo this, but I will say first that I have talks on doing ColdFusion and Docker images at my site. I've done some recently. I've done some in the past, and I'm going to do one next week. In fact, next week at the, do I say this here? No, but let me just say this somewhere. I think I do. Next week at the Adobe CF Summit, the talk I'm going to be giving is how the ColdFusion Docker images have evolved. And I'll mention and cover this and demonstrate it then. And part of my motivation for doing this talk was, you can see there's so much to understand about CFSetup. I couldn't have possibly covered that in that talk. I've got to just focus on how the images have evolved. And this is one feature of the images. And I'm just saying I'll point people to this talk, and then you guys are getting the benefit of seeing it, and it hopefully will help you. So anyway, if you're not yet doing much with CF Docker images, or if you are and you're tripping over things, I've got multiple presentations where I've covered them, and another will be coming next week. So check that out. And then I want to add as well that if you're not using Docker images, I said this earlier, well, this is still valuable because you can automate your administration using CFSetup. You know, it's a batch or an SH file. You can create your own script with multiple or one CFSetup command in it that does individual settings or works with importing a JSON file. So the point is, again, you can entirely automate script or automate, whatever you want to use the term, the configuration of a CF instance's admin settings with CFSetup. And they cover it a bit in the help. That's an anchor to the discussion in there, but it's basically just telling you what I said, which is, yeah, you can create a batch file that has multiple CFSetup calls in it. And so anyway, you can look at that if you're interested. And there is even a way to check the status of each command. It does, I don't know if you noticed when I did one that failed, it said failed. Well, it would return the status code. And in Windows or Linux, there's a way to check that status code. And the docs literally have a discussion of that. That doc page is tremendous. So if people aren't reading it, you should read it. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. You'll be really surprised. And there was my discussion of the related talk for next week. All right, cool. And as I said, those sessions won't be recorded, but I do plan to repeat that talk here on the Meetup in the near future. And again, I'll try to get the presenters, but it's all up to them. And you should encourage any presenter whose talk you want to see, either because you can't attend, because they're not going to do live streaming, or if you are there and you got to watch one talk while somebody else is doing another talk, encourage that presenter whose talk you didn't get to see to just reach out. Just go to ColdFusionMeetup.com and I make it very clear there how you can reach out to me and we'll get you on the schedule. All right. The last big thing that I wanted to make sure you knew about was that aliases feature. And so if I have any aliases defined, I can say CFSetup show alias. And I do happen to have some. And it's simple enough to create them if I wanted to create it. That's in the docs, but I already have them. So let me just show you that all these examples I've been doing, I want to get one that's just a display on the screen like that. Instead of saying this folder path, now I see I can just say CF 2018 because I created an alias for that. And there's my value in my CF 2018. So there's the alias. There's what it's mapped to. And you can create that with the alias command. So if I just say, you see how easy it is. You just say alias, the name of the instance, then the path. And they're showing a Linux path. Windows, you do a Windows path. You can also update one with the -U. You can also delete one with the -D. So I do want to stress, look at the help because there's cool stuff in there. This thing has so much more capability than I think most people realize. All right, so there's that. And then you can also select a default alias so that subsequent commands just work with that alias. That's pretty cool. There's literally a select command. So CFSetup select. But if I try to do that, it'll take it, but it won't really help me. I can't leave that off now. Gosh, doesn't work. For some reason, it doesn't work out here in the imperative mode. But if I did that in the CFSetup itself, now I'm in the CFSetup. If I said select CF 2018. Now if I say show all, I'm seeing everything for CF 2018. So that's pretty cool. And it even tells you, it's kind of like a bullet train. It tells you what one you've selected. Okay. And you can deselect them with the deselect command for whatever that's worth. And there was the update and the delete. And then we already did our quick demo. All right, moving on. There's all those categories. I already did it for you, but that show category, it's so important. And I've already done this. We can understand the basics of how it works. It covers all these hundreds. There's literally 300 settings in all these different categories. And I just want to remind you that some of those categories are ones that you might go, oh, wow, right. I forgot I could even do that. So you could use this to change the administrator password or to change what the allowed IP addresses are or to enable or disable the secure profile, because each of those is a setting in the security category. You can change JVM settings. Yeah, you could change the heap size with this. You don't have to edit the JVM config anymore. You could do it in the admin, right? So therefore, if you can do it in the admin, you can do it with this. So yeah, you can do that. You can change JVM args. You can view them. It's great. It's just really powerful. And you can if you didn't know, ColdFusion has the ability to have different user admin users, at the CF admin users. So I could have a CF admin user called Bob, and Bob's allowed to look at data sources, but Bob's not allowed to look at scheduled tasks. You can do that. In the admin, you can define that under the security page called manage users or users. And that's been around forever. And I did a talk on that like 15 years ago, but I should revise some of those talks and present them again because some people don't know this stuff exists. I see Steve asking, can you please post the country and state you're in? Steve, why are you asking that question? Before anybody answers that, I would like you to clarify why you're asking that question, because I don't think that's an appropriate question, but help us understand why you're asking. Then there's sandbox. There's a whole category of sandbox capabilities. And again, some people don't know. Okay, people are answering them anyway. All right. I'd like to know why he's asking that, but I guess it's innocent. And sure, there's lots of people from all over, but just trust me, you're not going to hear from everybody because there's, anyway, so sandbox is another capability that CF has that many people don't even know. You can control what code in a particular folder is allowed to do. Yeah, you could say code in this folder is allowed to access these folders, or code in this folder is allowed to use those data sources. Yeah, and that's got nothing to do with this. And if you didn't know it, again, I did talks on it, articles on it in the past. Many people don't know about this stuff. Well, that sandbox capability can be manipulated through this. It's just so much. And all the new 2021 things like SAML and NoSQL and cloud integration. So sometimes this is a cool thing for learning what's there, because you may not take the time to dip through the admin and look at things, but you might discover it in the command line and go, oh, what's that? So anyway, check all that stuff out. I'll leave you to look into that more. As far as comparing settings between instances, the point is you can use any decent compare tool to compare the settings between CF admins of the same version or different versions. You absolutely can do that. And you could do it with the JSON, of course. You could export the JSONs and compare the two JSONs. Some compare tools don't do a really good job of showing differences in JSON files. Some do, but some don't. But I'll just say you could pipe that show all to a file. It's just plain text with indentations. And you could also pipe it to the clipboard. And for those who don't know, let me just show you this real quick. I'm going to exit out of here and go back to when we were doing this at the command line. So there's all my settings for CF 2018, remember? Well, if you didn't know it, at least in Windows, you can do this, and in Linux, there's equivalent stuff. But I can say pipe it to the clip, CLIP is the short, command line shortcut for clipboard. And that just put everything in there into the clipboard. And if I open a tool like Beyond Compare, which is what I like to use, love that tool. And it's so cheap to buy, $39, I think, but you can get the trial for 30, not 30 days from the day you install it, 30 days of use. You could use it once a week for 30 weeks. But I'm going to do a text compare, and I'm going to paste what I already have in the clipboard right now is my CF 2018. So there's my CF 2018, and I'm going to go get my CF 2021, which I don't think I called CF 2021. Let me just make sure that did work, because I might just have an error in the clipboard. Yeah, so it wasn't that, it was CFusion. And so now in my clipboard is all the settings for CF 2021. And I'll come up here and come to the top, and that's a key. You got to scroll back up to the top and paste it in on the first line. And bam, I'm now comparing my two settings. Now, if I go to all, you'll see that it's got all the settings, and some of them are going to be the same. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff that was the same. You may not even know that setting's in there, but like that, whatever that was, these event gateway settings were the same, but these other things are different. Well, I'll leave you to look into this and how to use the tool. I've done talks and presentations and blog posts about using that tool. It's awesome. I love it. So let me move on. Beyond Compare, it's from Scooter Software. I see another question. Yeah, thank you, Steve. I appreciate now why you're asking that question. So it's cool if people want to give their identity where they are. That's your prerogative. Can you use this tool to do the original setup after the install? Well, maybe clarify what you mean by the original setup, and while you're answering that, I'm going to move on. So some of you know that there was this older ColdFusion archive car import mechanism that's been there since the 90s, literally. And it's not a CLI tool, it's a GUI tool, and it really hasn't changed much. The UI looks just like a 90s Java GUI tool, just like the WSConfig tool does. But it is updated for newer CS settings. So it's a cool tool. You recommend you use it, but some people don't want to use a GUI. And it produces a CAR file, which is a zip, and it's a zip of not just the XML files, but some customized XML files for use by this tool. And then that CAR file can be imported into any CF instance. And this goes to the question that Drew was asking. Some people will use CAR files to export settings out of one instance and then import them into another. Now, let me see what he said. I use Kaleidoscope on Mac. Okay, I guess that's a compare tool. I'll look forward to your answer about the question about original setup. Now, I want to throw out that some of you will go, I can't use the CAR file because I'm on ColdFusion Enterprise. Well, that was true prior to CF11. But since CF11, you can use the CAR mechanism with any CF version, which is cool. It's nice that Adobe did that back in CF11 in 2014. Well, I want to point out that the CF Docker images have, since they came out, been able to auto import such a CAR file. And I'll leave you to look in the docs on that, and I'll talk a bit about it in my talk next week. But I did a talk back in mid-2020, before CFSetup came out, called Migrating or Comparing CF Admin Settings Between Instances, Versions, and Engines. And in that one, I also talked about how could we compare with, say, Lucy. And the point is, I showed the CAR feature, the ColdFusion admin API script, approach to doing things, and I showed CFConfig, because all those are options for doing such migration and comparison. So CFSetup's a new way to do it, and I think for most people, they would think it was good. So there's Drew's question. Once you install the program is complete, you have to hit the website to complete the installation. Well, so let's just clarify. I think what you're really getting at is when one installs ColdFusion, after it's installed, you're shown, here's a link for the administrator. And the first time you go to the administrator says, oh, I see you've got another ColdFusion instance on this same machine. I can import those settings. Would you like me to do it? They call that migration. And that migration happens on the first launch of the admin. So not your website, but the CF admin. Yes, if that's what you were thinking of. And that migration will happen if you say yes, and it won't happen if you say no. And it won't happen if you're not on a machine that has an older CF version. So to answer your question, Drew, absolutely, you could use this tool or the CAR that I just talked about to get an export of settings from any CF instance on any machine anywhere in the world. And in the case of the CAR, you create a CAR file. In the case of the CFSetup, you'd create a JSON file. And then, yeah, you could bring that JSON file onto that CF instance, or point to it with a mapping, whatever, and use CFSetup import to, again, remember, you could bring in all the settings or only some of the settings. So yeah, that's the whole point. That's really cool. And so that presentation is available on my website. It's from, like I said, 2020. So it doesn't talk about CFSetup because that came out in November of 2020. Now about Commandbox, let's wrap up with this. We're right at the top of the hour. Apologize for going just a couple minutes over. And of course, we had a few minutes of intro too, so I didn't really start till about 5 after. For those unaware, Commandbox from Ortus has had a CFConfig forward box module for a long time. And it's long offered this ability to be a CLI to manage admin settings for either CF or Lucy. And that's great. And it too can be used with any CF instance, not just ones controlled by Commandbox. It's important that you know that. Some people don't use CFConfig because they go, well, I don't use Commandbox. I'm just using a regular CF instance. No. You can use CFConfig with any CF instance, just like we pointed CFSetup at a place that had the CF configuration and it was able to use that. So can Commandbox point to a CF instance that has some configuration. If you can point to it, you can manage it with CFConfig. It just has more power and capability to do things with its own Commandbox stuff, or it's easier. We'll just say it's not different. You can do the same thing with either one. But if you're in the Commandbox ecosystem and running servers or running instances in Commandbox, it's even easier because you just use the CFConfig and you don't have to name it. It knows what you're talking about. Anyway, it offers similar commands. It even offers a diff to do comparisons, and the CFSetup doesn't do that. Hold that thought, Steve. I'm just about to get to it. You can also merge settings when you do what they call an import or a transfer. They have both, and you can read about that. And it's just that you would add an append argument when you're doing an import or a transfer. as to whether you wanted to append what's there to what's already there or replace what's already there. I'll leave you to explore that. You can also create JSON files, export and import them. And the Commandbox images also have their way of pointing to such a JSON file. It's a different way, it's a different environment variable, and it's some other flexibility. You can even specifically use environment variables to point to particular settings to load either instead of or overriding what's in the JSON. Again, you can read the docs to learn more about that. And of course, Commandbox has lots more power and capability beyond just CFConfig with tag completion and bullet train and all kinds of cool stuff. So I just want to leave this at, because we're running out of time, I want to say, here's the link to the docs on CFConfig. See, it's called cfconfig.orderspokes.com. It's that compelling and substantial of a thing that it's got its own section of the docs. It's within Commandbox as a module, but it's really a very substantial feature, as it were, of Commandbox that you don't have to use. If you use Commandbox, you don't have to use it, but you should be using it. And now you can consider using it if you don't know about it, because you don't have to use Commandbox in any other way than just to use it for CFConfig. And remember, you can point it to any CF instance. It doesn't have to be one that's running in Commandbox. So it's a little meta. It's a little confusing when you're first getting started. But anyway, I want to point out there's also a nice series of videos that Brad Wood had done, and they're available at cfcast.com via that URL. You do have to be a paid member to see that particular series. They have lots of videos that are free. Some of them are not free. This is one of those. You have to be a member, and it's definitely worth considering, because there's more than just this. There are things that might be compelling to you. So again, check that out on your own. Now, about passwords, you may know that CF doesn't store clear text passwords in the admin. That's good. It doesn't. You can't see them in the UI. If you look at the underlying neo-XML files, you can't see them. It encrypts them, and it encrypts them using a seed that's unique to each instance. And that seed is created in installation. So every CF instance would have its own seed, and the neo-XML files, if you just looked in them, or remember when we were doing the show stuff, that password that appeared was a big, long encrypted string. Well, I didn't need to worry about you even seeing that, because you don't have the key to decrypt it unless you're on my machine. So that's a good and a bad thing. So the CF admin knows how to, create those passwords, store them as encrypted, knows how to read those passwords and decrypt them and use them. That's all great. And as I said, both the CFSetup output and the JSON files would show that encrypted password. That's good. Now, if you wanted to use that on another instance, then you would need to name a passphrase so that it could use that on the new instance, because the new instance would know what key was used to encrypt it on this instance. And so if you do that creation of a passphrase, then the CFSetup tool will create in the JSON file a seed that will be used to encrypt those passwords and would be used by that CFSetup import to decrypt it. Now, some people might get lost here. Let's not get focused too far in the weeds on this. I'm just saying this is the way it works, and CFSetup warns you of the need to secure such files, because, yeah, I mean, if you create such a JSON file, in it are encrypted passwords. No one could use those unless they knew your key. But when you use the passphrase so that you can take it to another instance, then that key is in that file, and the import will use that key to decrypt it. So you do want to secure these, and it warns you when you do any of that stuff. It says, hey, you should treat these JSON files that have passwords very carefully. Be sensitive about leaving them around. Now, one last thing someone might wonder, what about Commandbox's CFConfig? Well, for better or worse, when you use its tools to show stuff or create the JSON files, it doesn't show the encrypted password. It decrypts the password and shows them as plain text. So on screen, if I were to do CFConfig and show you some stuff, you'd have seen my password. So that's why I didn't do that. And if you created the JSON file from Commandbox CFConfig, it would show them as clear text. And there's benefit to that for sure. Some people might even see that as a cool bonus. Hey, I can find out what my password is for the CF admin. I just got to use CFConfig to display it. That's pretty cool. But it's also like a gun. That's dangerous. You better know what you're doing and be careful about it. So, like I said, it could be a pro or a con. There's also an interesting feature they have in their docs called JSON expansion replacements that's related to passwords. So I'll leave you look into that. I've provided that there for you to look into. There's the link for it, and so you can move on. And I'll get back to your question in just a moment there, Steve. So wrapping up, there's lots more set of command arguments and commands that I haven't shown you. Again, see that doc page. This is, to answer your question, Steve, this is very cool. When you do the CFSetup import, the tool will make a backup of the files that it's going to change. So again, some of you know that they're Neo XML files. I don't mean it's just going to make a Neo XML back. That's what the CFadmin does. And it's kind of sucky because it keeps one generation. And if you come in later and do another change, it overrides the last one and you're done. No more backup. No. This tool is different. It will save into the instances lib folder where you did the import. So by default, for most people, it would be CFusion lib. It creates a folder called CFSetup backup. And it will create in there a folder for the particular import. And in that, the copy of the Neo XML files that got modified before they got modified. That's really cool, right? So, Steve, there's no rollback per se. And that's an interesting point that it'd be nice if they would add an argument or a command that would do a restore. It starts to get a little scary, right? Though, if they did a restore of that, are they overriding what's there? Do you really want to? But I think that eventually they'll probably add such a capability because it makes sense. I'm telling you, I mean, 99.99% of people that use CF don't even know this tool exists. And of that 0.001% that do, they probably don't know anything about this backup. As more people learn about it, I hope that word would spread and people would press Adobe and say, hey, that's cool that you did that backup, but how can I roll back, right? You asked that question. I'm with you. This is the closest thing we've got is you could look in there and see, well, those what the settings were, but there's no automated rollback. That would be nice. And I suspect that Brad will be adding that to his, because it doesn't do it. Currently, Commandbox doesn't do this either. Even creating the backup, it doesn't do that. So I suspect we'll see that rolling out next week or two because that's how Brad rolls. All right, so moving on. Or somebody else, if you're into it, it's an open source project. You can contribute to it. And I would, but I'm so busy. I don't have time. So sorry about that. Moving on. As with any migration of admin settings between machines, just be aware you might need to modify some paths in that JSON before you import them because they point to a C drive and on the other new machine, it's on the D drive. That's not new or unique to this tool. Just be aware. You got to be sensitive to that. And there are a couple of known limitations about the new CF 2021 cloud config. And I'll just say if that's a feature of concern for you, there's a doc section in that page called limitations. And also Linux users, if you do get that downloaded version, you have to edit that CFSetup SH that I talked about to name whatever user is running CF. And again, that doc page talks about it. And it also talks about that if you happen to be deploying CF as a WAR file, it's the config CFSetup is inside of CFusion WAR WebInf. That's all in the docs. And I just want to say the docs, there's the link again. It would be 40 pages if you printed it out. It's half of it's examples, but only half of it's examples. Half of it is there's a lot to it. And I've tried to give you a quick overview of most of it. And I've shown you the online help, including help for each command. There isn't any particular community that's focusing on it, but of course, the normal places you might go in the wider CF community are available. And I have a place on my website, I call it CF411, and that CF411.com will take you there. And that will take you right to the section called CF Community Help. There's the ColdFusion forums, there's the ColdFusion Slack, there's the Facebook ColdFusion Programmers Group, there's the Ortus Commandbox stuff, and other Ortus communities built into their discourse, I believe it is. So, and then Lucy. And so I've got links to all those things on that CF community help page. So whatever's your flavor of how you like to get help, even Twitter, I give you some Twitter handles for some people. So just go check that out. And I'm always open to adding more. If I don't have something there, just let me know. And I can help directly, free to a point, or via consulting. Again, that's what I do for a living. And most of these things would be quickly solved if I could do it by email. I do it for free. It's just a couple minutes to answer your question. And if it would take more, then we get together and for as little as 15-minute minimum interval, I'll happily help. And if I don't solve your problem, you don't pay for the time. Or, if you don't find value in the time, is I'll put it that way. Because you might say, well, you didn't solve my problem, but you showed me some stuff that got me there after the call. Sometimes that's what I'm doing with people. So in summary, that tool, CFSetup, can be used to view, change, export, import all the CF admin settings. There's dozens of categories and hundreds of settings. Remember, it can be used with any CF version, not just 2021, and you can install it even if you don't have CF 2021. Those are just key points to remember, because again, 99% of people don't even know that it exists, and of those that do, they don't know these things. Like most people, if you asked them, did not know that they could use this tool with anything but CF 2021. And they didn't know that if you didn't have 2021, you could just go download it and run it. So I hope this talk will lead a lot of people to go exploring that tool, and we'll see more discussion of it, for better or worse. Maybe there's some warts and you'll point them out, and hopefully Adobe will get them fixed, and file a bug with tracker.adobe.com if you hit some bug, or let me know, because I'd be curious to hear about it. And maybe there's just a quirk in how it's being used, and we can maybe get them to improve something about the help or the docs or how the tool works. And remember, you can point to any CF instance by just naming the path, or use that cool alias feature, which really is cool. Once you start using this a lot, you'll go, oh man, typing those paths is annoying. I want to compare this to that on these different versions. It's great to just use the alias. And don't forget about the JSON file and how you can use that to auto configure CF containers, or do other automation of even any CF instance. Or like Drew asked, on a startup of a new machine. Sure, you could use this instead of the car mechanism to pull in all the settings from another instance. Not quite automation then, but somewhat, you could say. So the tool has its place for some, and for others, CFConfig will appeal. And I just wanted you guys to know mostly about that CFSetup, because you hear virtually nothing about it. You'll find plenty out there about CFConfig, whole webinars about it, but virtually, I think this is the first talk I've known of. In fact, I don't think I've even seen a blog post from anybody about using CFSetup. So I plan to create some out of this information, because I often will do this. I'll create a talk and never create any blog posts, so it's locked up in the PDFs. You got to know to come find it on my website. Google does a decent job, but not a great job of finding those PDFs. All right, and with that, I'll see some of you at next week's 10th anniversary CF Summit in Vegas, baby. And so with that, are there any other questions? I think I've answered everyone that's come up as we went. We're about 5 to 10 minutes over. A lot to convey. But I was glad to answer questions as we went, which stretched it out just a little bit. Anybody with any outstanding questions? And if you're going to write one, but it's going to take you 10 or 20 seconds to write it, maybe cut it to the clipboard and say, yep, hold on, and then we'll wait. Because it's been about 30 seconds. Yeah, cool. Thank you for that. Appreciate the feedback, both of you. And remember, if you have any questions and you don't get to ask them now, see the bottom right corner, all the slides have had that way to reach me by either email or social media. Thank you both. Yeah, Drew, I'm telling you, you are not alone. I suspect most people don't know the tool exists. And those who do don't appreciate its capability, and especially don't realize they can use it with other than CF 2021. And that really changes its value, right? And of course, it's got to be weighed against CFConfig for those that prefer to use that. And each has its pros and cons. And of course, CFConfig, being based on Commandbox, has all kinds of other advantages that go well beyond just this. So, I couldn't make it be a comparison of the two. That would have taken another half an hour, but I tried to show you a few key things that were enough for most people to take the ball and run with it. And perhaps somebody else might do some more elaborate comparison at some point. I don't think it'd really be worth it. Frankly, just learning about each one is what matters, and you can take them and run with them, whichever one you prefer to use. And it's not really a Coke and Pepsi thing. It's more just that if you have CF, you might want to use the tool that CF provides. If you want the flexibility to do more, or some capability that it has, then definitely go check out CFConfig. All right, well, I don't see any more questions. Nobody said, hold up, I want to ask some. So I'm going to assume we're done. Thanks, everybody. Again, so hope to see some of you next week in Vegas. And then look for a 300th anniversary episode coming sometime soon after the conference. It'll be a bit of a celebration, looking back and looking forward. And I'm open to feedback and ideas. And I've got some ideas myself that we'll talk about in that 300th anniversary episode. So until then, cheers.